Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Future Unchained Toronto's third event. This event, we will be focusing on labor trafficking. So, first of all, before we start, it would be great for us to have Parmis to read us the land acknowledgement for the land that we're hosted on.
The land acknowledgement is an expression and a thanks to the land to pay respect to the Indigenous nations who are the original caretakers of the land. And that is one of the first steps to truth and reconciliation. So now on to the actual land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we are hosted on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, Métis people. I also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit and the Williams Treaties signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. We also recognize the enduring presence of all First Nation, Métis, and Inuit peoples. I also want to express gratitude to the Indigenous, Black, and Brown femmes, Two-Spirits, trans, and queer folks who are leading change to make it a safer world for everyone. We are grateful for the opportunity to live, work, and learn on this land, and to care for it alongside Indigenous caretakers who continue to and have been doing so for generations. And at the bottom right corner, you can also see some other resources about the land acknowledgement, as well as a link that shows you the land that you are currently on. Thank you.
Yep, thank you so much, Parmis. So first of all, before we start, I'd like to show us a quick GIF that is very low quality, but this is all the news releases that are regarding missing peoples that the Toronto Police Station Toronto Police Service has sent in March. And as you can see, there has been 131 news releases just regarding missing persons alone. So this is a very serious issue that is happening right in our communities, and it's really not that far away from us. Next up, I would like to introduce Future Unchained. So Future Unchained is a nonprofit organization that aims to serve and empower victims of human trafficking. We're founded in California, but we have also expanded to various places around North America, including our Toronto chapter. Our parent organization have done many amazing work. So they have published a highly detailed curriculum in their website, and you can look up that curriculum by scanning the QR code down there. They have also hosted many in-person workshops, which we are also hoping to do after COVID is over. So next, we would like to have a short introduction on what human trafficking is. So human trafficking is the transporting of victims for monetary, labor, or sexual intention. It is considered modern-day victory and a violation to the human rights. This is why we need anti-human trafficking organizations and events to educate the public on this issue.
So for today's agenda, we're basically focusing on 5 main sessions. So we'll introduce labor trafficking and some tips and emergency contacts that you can always use while you're in danger. And we'll also bring up some changes and impacts made by society and breakout room scenarios. So firstly, what is labor trafficking? Labor trafficking is a form of human trafficking, and it involves recruiting, transporting, or holding victims to coerce them into doing any kind of work. And labor traffickers get their victims to work through different forms of coercion. So traffickers control their victims in various ways, such as taking away their identity documents and passports, sexual abuse and threats, intimidation, physical violence, and isolation. And victims might suffer physical or emotional abuse and often live and work in horrific conditions. And below, we have found an excerpt online, and he told her that he had control over her, that she belonged to him, and that he could do anything he wanted to her. He became more and more abusive with her, and both physically and verbally. He threatened to kill her and told her that if she reported him to the police, he could easily hire someone to kill her for a couple of rocks of crack. He told her that if she fled, he could end up with finding her and that he would stab her. So in this paragraph, we can clearly see that this human trafficker threats this woman by her life. So I'll pass it to Meta for some red flags that you should always watch out for in real life.
taking a look at red flags, if your employer is providing you with over promises in the sense the job offer seems too good to be true, or if you have no questions and no answers. So if most of your questions aren't answered properly, or if the employer gives you indirect answers and you notice they are not being transparent. Unusual job location, and this would also account for living and or working conditions are inhumane or unsafe. If you notice awkwardly worded agreements or contracts, or if you notice odd cash flows when you're doing your research or even while you're working in the workplace, if there's lack of information of the company when you're doing your research, if workers are not free to leave the premises, if you ask about if they're asking you about unnecessary information, for example, who do you live with? But please do note, asking for your address is not something to worry about. A lot of companies require this information for mailing you documents. And again, do your research to make sure it's safe. And also, if the workers are asked to live at the business and work there, employers owe a large debt that is continually increasing and cannot be paid off to you. Or if someone else controls your identification documents and finances, or if the employer makes threats of deportation and or reports immigration status to authorities, or if you feel like you and your loved ones are in danger if you don't work long hours or accept a lower wage. And also, we would like to add on that there are many more red flags, but these are just a high level, and these are what we chose to emphasize to everyone today. Thank you.
Next up, I'll be talking about some employee rights that you have as an employee of a company. So if a company or your employer are violating these rights, then you probably know it's time to leave this company and maybe even sue them. First of all, your first basic right is to receive equal pay for equal work. This means that regardless of your gender, sexuality, orientation, race, and any other thing else, as long as you are doing the same work, same quality, you are required to be paid at the same rate. Next up, you have the right to know. You have the right to know about the hazards or dangers in your workplace, and you have the right to know how to protect yourself from harm. Your workplace, your employer must teach you and train you for protection equipment and provide you with them. But if they don't, you have the right to refuse unsafe work, including situations where you believe you are in danger of workplace violence. Your employer cannot fire or discipline you for refusing unsafe work or for asking them to address a health and safety issue. Your employer also cannot penalize you for following workplace health and safety laws and for obeying a Ministry of Labor inspector's order. This would be an unlawful thing to do. Lastly, you have the right to participate. You have the right to help identify and resolve workplace health and safety concerns. There are many ways you can do this. For example, you can ask questions, you can raise concerns, and give positive feedback. And one of the most effective ways you can get involved in this is to join the Health and Safety Committee at your workplace. Other rights that you have, other than the 4 basic rights, include getting paid. First of all, you should get a regular pay and accompanying wage statement, which is often referred as a pay stub that is clear. It's a good idea for you to keep your own record of how many hours you have worked, and your pay rate must be equal or greater than the minimum wage for your position or job. The minimum wage is different for students, liquor servers, home workers, and hunting and fishing guides. If you work over 44 hours per week, you must also receive an overtime pay for the extra hours that you have worked, which is more than 50% of your regular pay rate. You also have the right to enjoy your 9 public holidays, which include New Year, Family Day, Good Friday, Victoria Day, Canada Day, Labor Day, Thanksgiving, Christmas, and Boxing Day. If you work on these public holidays, you should get your public holiday pay plus a premium pay. And depending on the industry you work in, your premium pay could be 150% of your regular pay or 50% more than your regular pay or more. Most employees also earn at least 2 weeks of vacation every year. So if you decide to work during vacation, you are entitled to be paid at least 4% of your total wages earned as vacation pay. And if your employer did not pay you your vacation pay already, then they owe you that pay when your employment ends. Your employer cannot deduct any type of wages from your wage except for 3 types. First of all, statutory, which is like tax and other stuff, and court ordered, and those authorized by you in writing. Some employers, they may require you to pay for your own uniform, but if they were going to deduct that cost from your wage, they must have a handwritten letter or agreement that is signed by you in writing. And lastly, when a job ends, you must receive an advance notice in writing and or termination pay if your employer ended your employment, which means that they fired you. The amount of notice and termination pay depends on how long you have been employed in the job and your agreement between you and your employer. Lastly, your employer should have an employment standards poster displayed where you can read about some of your ESA rights. And these are the rights that you should stand up for and make sure that your employer does not violate when you are working at anyone's company.
Okay, so here we have a real case. It's about a child labor survivor. She talks about her experiences, the conditions she goes through, and states a lot of common factors that many child labor survivors undergo. So we're going to watch the first 5 minutes of this video.
Survivor and forced marriage survivor. My name is Nasreen Sheikh. I come from very rural village on the border of India and Nepal. Most of the people are undocumented, which means like the people who born there or died there, there's no birth certificate. So because of that, I also don't know how old I am. I can guess 25, 26, 27 years old. My village was completely male-dominated society, and I saw my aunt being murdered for speaking up for herself, and I witnessed my 12-year-old sister being forced into marriage. And my mom, she said that this is what happened to me, this is what is happening to your sister, and someday it will happen to you. I chose to run away the village because I did not want it to be forced into marriage. One of my cousin who was working in the sweatshops, he took me from the village to Kathmandu when I was around 9 or 10 years old. When I came to the sweatshop for the first time, they teach me how to do the stitch just straight, and then I was keep practice. I would do the brooming and I would wash the dishes or collecting the water, but mostly in the machine. And my machine was like higher than me, so we had to put other stack of clothes so I could fit in the machine. It took me almost 2 months to look out of the window because I was so scared. I come from like such a small village, and then all of a sudden I'm in the big city. It gave me a shock. In the sweatshop, 6 of us, 4 of them were adult, lived, worked, slept in 10 by 10 room without bed or bathroom or having access to even clean drinking water. We were paid less than $2 and forced to work almost 12 to 15 hours a day. We had piles of orders, like 500 pieces, 600 pieces, and we needed to finish that on time. And if we did not finish, we will not get paid at all. So for that reason, we had to wake up sometime 4 a.m., 5 a.m. and work all the way to midnight, and still the pile of clothes will be not finished. We didn't had any day off, like 7 days work, like one order will come and the second order is coming back again. It was like cycle. Sometimes we also would die. My hand would stay black almost for a week, and then I would put kerosene in my hand and try to take off that color. And then the kerosene stays like a smell when I would eat food. The rice and lentils were like very low nutrition food they gave. And my food, all of the dust of the clothes, like the little fibers will go into the food, and often I would pick up like that long threads from my food. So much chemicals are dyed in those clothes, and then eventually it gets discarded into the rivers and end up in the oceans also. It harms the earth too. Fashion is one of the most polluting industry in the world. I was not completing the whole piece. I was doing just one part, and label or taggery was happening somewhere else. The designs were same and same, like fast fashion. Thousands of pieces being repeated on and on. Our part was to just stitch. My little fingers, they were like fast as machine, because I knew that in order to get a little bit of rest, I need to be fast. And that is when I felt like I was not a human. I felt like a machine. And I just hated those clothes. They were woven with the energy of my suffering. Many times when I was in the sweatshop, I would collapse onto the large bundle of clothes that I was making. Like, I didn't even had a bed, and I would just daydream like where these clothes are going to, who is going to wear them. I started to talk to the shirt or the clothes that I was making, and talking to the shirt and saying, whoever will wear these clothes, I hope they can feel me. I hope they can feel my blood. I hope they can see my tears. Because as a young child, I just wanted to go to sleep, and it was not possible. And I tell people that, like, whoever is wearing those clothes, and some people are wearing those clothes right now, and they don't know. If you don't know where your clothes or where your things comes from, you might be consuming suffering. I want people to know where your things come from, so you don't have to consume suffering. After working 2 years in the sweatshop,
Okay, so as you heard, she had to work for an excessive amount of hours and had to do an excessive amount of work. She wasn't provided with a regular wage, and near the end, the boss runs away with all their salaries as well. The conditions there, like the factory was highly polluted, toxicated, and the employees were suffocating. So let's hope that this doesn't happen to any other child out there. And let's make that happen through our actions and perhaps by spreading awareness. So now let's move on to the recent DSS case. DSS stands for Department of Social Services. So in this case, 3 individuals defrauded or cheated and recruited 76 workers at a farm in Minnesota, United States. And these workers were recruited from an international point, meaning they came from all over the world in the hope that coming to the US will allow them to gain a sufficient amount of money, and that they'll be able to keep their families back home safe and secure, but the contrary happens. So just to get recruited or to just get into this opportunity, they were required to pay very expensive upfront fees. And during the job, the victims were physically and psychologically threatened. The authorities had thugs threaten both the workers and their family members with physical and sexual violence, and they were also threatened to blacklist disobedient workers. Disobedient meaning workers that didn't obey to their command or didn't want to take any risks. And blacklist is sort of this permanent mark in one's career, allowing them to have a hard time finding another job or being financially stable. So I'm going to pass it on to Nabila, who's going to talk about the different forms of illegal labor.
Hi, so the different forms of illegal labor are bonded labor, which is the least known form of labor trafficking to this day, and it is the most widely used method of enslaving people. Victims become bonded laborers when their labor is demanded as a means of repayment for a loan or a service in which its terms and conditions have not been defined, or in which the values of the victim's services as reasonably assessed is not appealed towards the liquidation of the debt. The value of their work is greater than the original sum of money that was borrowed. Forced labor is a situation in which victims are forced to work against their own will under the threats of violence or some other forms of punishment. Their freedom is restricted and a degree of ownership is exerted. Forms of forced labor can include domestic servitude, agricultural labor, sweatshop, factory labor, janitorial, food service, and other service industry labors, and also including begging. Child labor is a form of work that is likely to be hazardous to the health and or physical, mental, spiritual, moral, or social development of children, and can interfere with their education. The International Labour Organization estimates worldwide that there are 246 million exploited children between the ages between 5 and 17 who are involved in debt, bondage, forced recruitment for armed conflict, prostitution, pornography, the illegal drug trade, and the illegal arms trade. And there is a video that is going to be recapping the different forms of illegal labor.
People recognize that this is happening in communities that, you know, the people that our kids might be playing hockey with their kids may be exploiting workers. And it's very hard for us to begin wrapping our brain around what that means, how that is showing itself in our own communities.
The general perception of labor trafficking is that it doesn't happen. When we do provide education to the general public, we do find that they want it sensationalized. They want to talk about, you know, like the sex and the gore and the gangs, not so much about migrant worker rights, especially when there is this undercurrent of anti-immigration sentiment that goes along with it. If we're seeing a situation in public of an individual, perhaps they're caring for a family or they're working in a store or on a farm, and we see that their conditions seem unfair or they're experiencing abuse, we need to speak up. If it's safe to do so, to try to talk to that person who's experiencing that, but if not, to report it.
Dahil pinag-reside nyo kami dito, ituring nyo kami ng tama, yung normal na tao na nabubuhay na parang citizen din kahit hindi naman citizen, yung may benepisyo, may access kami ng tulong galing sa gobyerno in case na nangangailangan kami.
Pues yo pienso que les pediría que, pues, como en las armas tuvieran más inspección, como en seguridad de trabajo, que inspeccionaran las viviendas, ¿va? Porque, pues, como hemos platicado con los compañeros en otros lugares, hay compañeros que pues están también igual en malas condiciones las viviendas.
Before, I really regret that why I came here in Canada, because it's in 2 years I never see how it's beautiful. But then when I get my open working permit, then I meet more people. I meet like West Coast, I meet Deborah's, I meet Migranted. Then I learn how to like to live freedom.
So thank you, Nabila, for introducing different types of labor trafficking. And now I want to bring up some statistics. And here we go. So 24.9 million people trapped in forced labor worldwide. And among these peoples, there are 16 million of victims of labor trafficking in private industry around the world. And 4.1 million victims of state-imposed forced labor, and 5.4 victims of modern slavery for every 1,000 people in the world. And there are 1 in 4 victims of modern slavery are children. And you can see there are a lot of child laborers used in road.
What to do if you're in a dangerous situation. So first, you want to become aware of your trafficking warning signs. If you find out that you are being trafficked, first you must speak up and attempt to leave. This may not actually always work, so call the police or a helpline if needed. So some emergency contacts and helplines that you might want to be recommended are the police or 911, or some emergency help services such as the Canadian Human Trafficking Hotline, which is 1-833-900-1010, or you can email them at hotline@cctech.ca. Some other useful resources are publicsafety.gc.ca, which is actually Canada's national plan to combat labor trafficking, and Canadian Centre to End Human Trafficking.ca, which has some information about general labor trafficking and what to do if you feel threatened.
Okay, actions taken. The House of Commons proclaimed February 22nd as Human Trafficking Awareness Day. The Ontario government also came up with an anti-human trafficking strategy that consists of 4 main actions: raising awareness of the issue, protecting victims and intervening early, supporting survivors, and holding offenders accountable. Bringing awareness. This is just an example of one event that took place in Canada that helped to increase awareness of human trafficking. It was a 2-hour-long event at Intercity Shopping Center and was meant to engage the public about human trafficking and the importance of having specified and specialized services available. It also discussed issues revolving around human trafficking, such as being vastly underreported and other statistics. You can scan this QR code if you would like to read an article about this event. Okay, so now we're going to watch a video that commemorates one of the actions that countries have taken to stop human trafficking.
In forced labour. 50 countries have now ratified the Protocol on Forced Labour, demonstrating their determination to end forced labour in all its forms. They have committed to prevent forced labour, protect victims, and ensure that they have access to justice and remedies.
50 ratifications. That's worth celebrating. Congratulations, ILO. The ILO protocol is critical and all governments are called on to ratify it in the fight against modern slavery.
El hecho de contar ya con 50 ratificaciones de este protocolo es el inicio de un camino para un resultado con mucho más impacto en este área.
Notre souhait est de voir ces nombres substantiellement relevés et tous les pays du monde engagés dans un mouvement d'ensemble pour éradiquer à jamais le travail forcé.
Slavery is often hidden in plain sight, but today we celebrate the fact that 50 countries have taken a stand to end forced labor, and they've done so by ratifying the protocol of the ILO.
Hoje, nós damos passo à frente na eliminação do trabalho escravo em todo o mundo. Parabéns pelas 50 ratificações do protocolo da OIT sobre trabalho forçado.
50 countries have chosen freedom and ratified ILO's protocol on forced labor. But our pledge to restore hope to millions trapped and tricked into modern-day slavery doesn't have to stop with 50 ratifications.
And I refuse to accept that our collective power, wealth, technology, constitutions, and laws are not able to end modern slavery. We can do it, and we will do it.
A future of work that is free of forced labour, human trafficking, child labour and modern slavery is a future that we must shape together. Because forced labour has no place in the better normal that we want to start building as of today.
Laws against human trafficking. The Criminal Code of Canada actually has quite a few sections that are specifically targeted towards human trafficking. Section 279.01 is when someone is recruited, transported, concealed, and/or harbored. Traffickers will exercise control and influence over this person so that they can exploit them. This offense can lead to life imprisonment if traffickers commit any of the listed actions, and in other cases, it is up to 14 years. Section 279.011 is if a person under 18 is trafficked. This results in a minimum of 6 years for the same things as above, or 5 to 14 years for other cases. Section 279.02 is for when a person is exploited for material benefit. It results in the traffickers being imprisoned for up to 10 years. Section 279.03 is for withholding or destroying documents, such as passports, and can result in up to 5 years imprisonment. Last is Section 118 from the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, and this can lead to up to a $1 million fine or life imprisonment. Impacts these laws have brought. Since 2008, police have reported 1,708 incidents of human trafficking, and the number has generally been trending upwards. The number of human trafficking incidents reported in 2019 increased by 44% since 2018. Keep in mind, though, the increase in the number of incidents reported is not necessarily an indication of an increase in the occurrence of this crime. This is likely a result of more willingness from the victims and members of the public to report the incidents, and also improved detection by law enforcement. Other impacts. With the help of the Canadian Human Trafficking Hotline, from May 29, 2019 to May 28, 2020, 415 cases of human trafficking were identified. 593 victims and survivors were reported in relation to these cases. From April 1st to September 30th, 2020, approximately 76 victims and survivors were identified. 135 referrals were provided to these victims and survivors. Approximately 40 tips or reports were provided to law enforcement and children aid societies. The criminal code also contains several measures that make testifying less traumatic for victims and other vulnerable witnesses. Number 1 is a testimonial aid such as a screen that prevents the witness from seeing the accused. Number 2, a closed-circuit television that allows the witness to testify from outside the courtroom. Number 3, the presence of support persons. Number 4 is publication bans on information that would identify a complainant or witness. And lastly, orders can also be issued to exclude the public from the courtroom.
Let's take up the answers, and I'm sure everyone had really good insights on these questions. So the first one was, what if a stranger, so just to remind you the question, it was, what if someone or a stranger offers you a weird opportunity, a job opportunity? So first, ask questions and look for professional answers. Check the location in the area where the job is taking place, so you know if you should even take the job into account. Let a trusted third person know where your location is, and if you're unsure if it's even safe, have a trusted adult or lawyer read through any contracts before you put your signature on it. If you think that they can find some stuff that you missed, check the company's cash flow. Is it reasonable? And research the company. I think that's the main one that we like to emphasize. Is it a legitimate company? So basically, legitimate companies will have a lot of information available. So make sure you're not just doing research on the surface and you dig deep and you can actually find a lot of information to be safe. And the second question was, what will you do if you're involved in labor trafficking? So be calm, try to find a loophole. The traffickers will make at least one misstep, which you can take advantage of. Make an escape plan by closely monitoring their moves of the trafficker. Try to make alliances to help one another out of the situation, because I'm sure you're not going to be the only one who is being trafficked. There will be other people. It usually happens in a mass bulk, I guess. And in not so extreme situations, report to higher officials and do not be scared to fight for your safety and rights. And for the last question, what will you do if your friends get involved in labor trafficking, and what can you do to help them? In not so extreme cases, you are allowed to be in contact with them. So if that's possible, try to ask them and let them know what your steps you think you'll be taking if they're scared to report the employer themselves. And before you call 911, be in close contact with your friends who's involved in labor trafficking. So have a code with them. So if they have send you 3 emojis or something, that means things are getting really bad. Or if they're not replying to you and it's been over a week, that's when you know you have to take action and you can call 911 right away.
So what to expect next is that we have some future events. On April, we'll be introducing what is sex trafficking, and on May, we'll also be introducing what is organ trafficking. And lastly, please follow us on social media on Instagram at futureunchained_Toronto, and our website is futureunchained.org. And we'd like to thank you to Taking It Global, the Government of Canada, and the Canada Service Corps for funding this organization.